Hello, my name is James Cook. I live in Rockport, Maine. What's your opinion of what the appropriate response is when these federal officials come in and act like they've been acting elsewhere? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Natasha, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So this is an important issue to me. I actually was just having a conversation with one of the assistant attorney generals today about that some folks call themselves law and order, right? But sometimes we don't see that translate into real life. So I do believe in law and order, and I believe that that applies to all of us. That applies to every single person in the United States, in Maine. That's the law, right? That's how we have civilized society. That's how we know that the police can't come to our house, and I don't mean this to our local police officers in any way, or even with the federal officers I've worked with. But if the police are unchecked at any level, that's dangerous to democracy. It's dangerous to our citizens. It's dangerous to our non-citizens. And police and prosecutors need to be ready if there were to be a crime committed by a law enforcement officer, any law enforcement officer, right? It could be a local law enforcement officer, it could be a federal law enforcement officer. We've prosecuted local law enforcement officers, not something I love doing, not the first thing we want to do. When we get a case in our district, we usually send it out to another district because we don't want to treat somebody differently because they've worked in the district. We're talking about federal law enforcement officers. These aren't folks that I've worked with, right? So if anyone comes into our community and commits a crime, that's what we're looking at. What are the elements of the crime? So we want to work with our local law enforcement to make sure we're all on the same page, that just because you wear a uniform doesn't mean that you can commit atrocities. And if we can't agree on that, and I'll say, I think in the Midcoast, I think our agencies in the Midcoast agree that no matter who you are, the law applies to you, and that the police are going to investigate. I've talked to our U.S. attorney just to make sure. We've seen in other jurisdictions. I want to be able to make sure we can investigate crimes that may be committed here, and I want to have access to those scenes. And our U.S. attorney is a law and order individual that believes that the laws of the state of Maine are important, just as the federal laws are. So I think making sure we have those conversations ahead of time, and then looking at each case, right? It needs to be fair and just. I will say also, I know other prosecutors in the country that are considered kind of reform prosecutors and have been on the front lines of these issues in places like Minneapolis. And in Virginia, there's a prosecutor named Steve Toscano who has prosecuted a federal officer before it became these ICE operations that were getting out of control in some of our cities. And I've had conversations with him about what it looks like, just to make sure we're prepared. I hope it never happens. I hope that we're just prepared for it. But I think that the road to mass atrocities is paved with people just putting their head in the sand. And law enforcement can play a huge role, has to play a huge role every day in upholding democracy and fairness and justice.
Thank you. Barbara.
So my opinion is it's horrible and it's illegal. I'm a constitutional law scholar. My senior thesis in college was the political theory of James Madison. And I feel that the Constitution is being violated on a regular basis. I feel that the rule of law is being disrespected. I actually organized the rally for the rule of law last year in Portland, and attended a lot of rallies, try to express my opinion on these. I think that, we as lawyers have a certain obligation to point out that there are violations of the law. I mean, just no way that, I know there are political differences. I will respect that. But my personal political orientation is that this is wrong and it shouldn't be happening. And read the Democratic platform. I know you won't want to, but there's a lot of things on that. Anyway, we need to make sure that there is respect for our processes. I think the interesting dilemma would be if a federal officer was violating the law. We haven't yet had the situation where a state officer then attempts to arrest that person, because that's what would happen. I mean, if we could see a crime, we could probably bring it. But I think that's the big question. It's like, how do we really enforce it? Because it puts our state officers at risk, and they, since they don't have identification or you can't know who they are, or what their faces look like, or anything. But I just am astounded by the constant violations of the Constitution. And that I'm very upset with what's happening with our morality. I think that encouraging and being untruthful and encouraging untruthfulness is cutting at the moral fiber of our society, such that people, aren't being truthful just because they feel they don't have to. And that's another problem that law enforcement has, is that, now you have these people who say, oh, I didn't do it, or whatever. There's no morality. And so I'm just really upset by the whole thing. And as a district attorney, if I am lucky enough to have that position, I would continue to do what I can to uphold the rule of law, be able to speak on that publicly, protect the rights of protesters, try to deal with hate speech. First Amendment is a great thing, but right now we're getting a lot of hate speech and threats. And so we're on the, a side where maybe, there's not First Amendment protection for that sort of thing, so there might need to be criminal remedies, I just don't know. But anyway, I moved off into that part, the First Amendment, but anyway, I just, it's very, very sad to someone like me who has spent a long time doing things to uphold the Constitution.
Thank you. John?
Well, from a law enforcement standpoint, and this is a extremely hot kettle boiling nationwide. We statutorily are sworn to uphold the state statutes. And my personal opinion, I'm gonna filter it a little bit because I'd be using sailor talk. And I think what's gone on in our country with these ICE agents is horrible. They're nothing but thugs. I started in 1980 in law enforcement, and I knew ICE agents back then. These are not ICE agents. They're hired guns doing a dirty man's work. And if they are in my jurisdiction and they commit a violation that is arrestable, you're damn straight they're gonna get arrested. And I'm pretty much gonna leave that one at that.
Thank you. Patrick?
So it is going on everywhere, and to some extent it has happened here briefly. We had an incident a few months ago that could have been much worse. And that's kind of the point, I think, is that we need to be involved as law enforcement on the ground with anybody that is trying to exercise their constitutional rights. And it is our responsibility, especially as the elected sheriffs, to protect those rights. States have sovereignty to a point. Yes, there's the US Constitution, but we have a state constitution and state laws. And if our people are being victimized, it's our responsibility to deal with that. If that includes crimes that are arrestable, we need to do that. We need to take those people into account. I won't get into the details, but within the 4 years I've been here, I've had to do that even with some of my own staff. That things have been done that they had to be held accountable for. Sometimes that meant working with the agencies that were investigating them to hold them accountable. I think that's what's missing in this scenario is the federal government is not working with us and sharing that information. And I get it. Sometimes the person you're investigating can be a law enforcement officer. We get that. But there are people within the circle or outside the circle that aren't that person. It's just common courtesy. I mean, my staff does not go into a local town that has a police department most of the time without telling them they're going to be there. It's that same courtesy. If somebody's coming into your house, they should knock on the door and say, I'm coming in your house. You don't necessarily say what you're doing, but at least let us know you're there. Because one of the things that has happened in the past, not necessarily with this scenario, but when agencies didn't communicate, you had blue on blue, as we called it. You would have scenarios where somebody called, hey, there's people sneaking around my house, and if you didn't know there were the cops, you show up to deal with the people sneaking around your house, find out it's the state police executing a warrant, but they didn't tell us. It's that same type of scenario. So I think it's that open communication needs to happen. We don't need to tell the world what's going on necessarily, because some things have to be private and secure, but if they're doing the right things, it's not going to be issued. We work with Marshal Service all the time. I work with the FBI all the time. We We don't seem to have that problem with those branches of the government at the moment. Why is it specifically within the DHHS realm that we're seeing kind of this radio silence? If we can solve that, I think we'll solve a lot of these problems.
Thank you, Patrick.
What are your standards of practice related to coordination with federal ICE agencies, and what will they be? And specifically, do you see it as the role of the sheriff to protect Maine's immigrants in Knox County?
So I'll answer the last part first. It is absolutely our role to protect everybody in our community, regardless of how they got here. The sheriff is a constitutional position. We're elected by you to represent your interests, to represent your public safety. Some of you may remember earlier this year we had to deal with this issue a little bit here in Knox County. The point is the sheriff is elected by the Maine people and has an oath to the federal constitution, yes, but also the Maine Constitution. And we have authority only within the Maine Constitution. We are not responsible to enforce federal rules, whether they be criminal or administrative. We're responsible to enforce Maine's criminal rules. A lot of the things that ICE in particular is targeting are administrative violations. That is not our responsibility as sheriffs, as elected law enforcement officers in this state. Our job is to take care of our public safety interests. So the first part is I will continue to do that. We will focus on Maine law. We will focus on keeping our communities safe on that regard alone. The federal government often asks for assistance. One of the challenges in particular that I've been trying to address using our public safety partners in this state, which is the Commissioner of Public Safety, and then some of our other federal agencies like Federal Marshals, Federal Bureau of Investigation, to figure out a way to communicate with our peers at DHS within ICE of why can you not communicate with us? Why are you taking these tactics that are different than what we are used to and not communicating with those that are local law enforcement who know our communities best to help you mediate these problems? We don't want to arrest any of these folks. That is not our concern. If it's a public safety concern, we'll deal with it, but otherwise it is a completely administrative issue for the federal government. Thank you.
John, same question?
I basically concur with what Pat's mentioned as far as taking care of all that are here, whether you're here as a migrant. If you're here lawfully, you're here lawfully. I come from an immigrant family. I am not real pleased with what I've seen ICE do now. I worked with ICE back in the 80s. It's a different game today, and the powers that be are changing the game. What we as sheriff have the ability to do is enforce the Maine Constitution. And in doing that, that includes immigrants that are here validly and not creating any criminal activity.
Thank you.